When do I get a chance to talk to somebody else about what I believe God is doing in my life, through me or with me or whatever, my struggles, my visions?
I suspect
That's what the young people are saying.
Where do I
They're not
go?
going to church. They're telling each other.
Said, God spoke to me and told me this answer, you'd be laughed at.
Do you
That's
think God
ridiculous.
spoke to you? Do you think he did?
I don't even think in those terms.
Well, that's what I say. Well, then why do we have to bother talking about whether we think God spoke to us? Or, I mean, that's confusing to me.
Except that if you have that conviction, then why not say that? Because if the fact of God be real, then why not say so, regardless of whether the other individual is going to laugh or accept? If your conviction is this, then we ought to do it. I think one of the reasons that we've been reluctant to talk about this whole business of saints and sinners is because we have moved away from what was the true biblical perspective on saints and sinners. In the Bible, the saint was never presented as the individual who was without feet of clay or without faults.
He wasn't even presented as a saint.
Exactly. He was simply an individual living and moving in a given historical situation, a very creative moment in history, and
Now, we turned him into a saint. We look back and say, hey, that
but
guy
this
was
is our judgment
who
about
indeed
him.
was laughed at times.
Why do we have to use just the
he-
Bible
he-
as
the
that?
individual?
Weird,
Yeah,
sometimes.
Many times he was.
Yeah.
Many times he was. But we're afraid to say that sainthood is a good thing because we think in terms of perfection. And I think that perhaps our cynicism about the use of the term is our recognition of what the Bible recognizes all the time. That is that individuals are not perfect persons, and they ought not get hung up on the fact that they're not perfect.
I think
Jane said something, I don't know if
Well, I said, why the emphasis on just what the Bible says? This indicates, are we all from the Judeo-Christian background, or have we not, some of us, moved beyond it? Why do we have to have the discussion in these terms? I mean,
I really, agree with Jane. When I was just like listening and wondering, how this relates. Don't forget the historical origin of a saint. It was in a rural community, a much less complex community, I think. And now you're in a 20th century. You're in a highly urbanized, highly complex, highly pressurized society, where the meaning of a saint, I think, takes on a completely different concept. I think people now just want some personal endorsement. I think they want something that they can relate to in a warm sense, in an intimate sense. I don't think they want to get bogged down on, abstract ideas. Or I don't even think, like I know for the younger kids, you can talk about George Washington, you can talk about Abraham Lincoln historically, and you can tell them that, they were good people or what they did. But they want to know, well, what does Lincoln know about now? What does Lincoln have to say to me right now? I have to go out of this school, and I have to be confronted by, a sex drive, by maybe a drug culture, pressure to go to college, pressure to survive, and all the people around me seem to be, subject to the same pressures. You want me to talk about sainthood. I just want somebody to care about me, and I want to care about them, And I think that's why a lot of young people have turned off the churches. Because they feel the churches are bogged down in terminology and dogma, and they say, come on, I'm living down here, help me live, right now. Maybe we can get around to the idea of a saint, Maybe after we discuss a lot of things, you can say, well, maybe that is a saint. Maybe there's a new kind of saint. But don't start off with that, because right now I've got more immediate human needs, and I just can't relate your presentation about sainthood and history and religious differences, like even in Philadelphia. I think that a lot of kids say, like, what are the churches doing? And if the churches are doing something, they're not aware of it. They don't understand that the churches are they working together? There's people dying in the street. There's people that are hungry. There's people that don't have a job, and they're saying, where's the church leadership there? So don't come and talk to me about sainthood unless you show me that you're involved in humanity right now.
I think that the reason that we are hung up on religious definitions right now is because we're talking about two terms which are religious. Saint and sinner are religious terms. They're not secular terms. A sainthood has always been determined by the church. And the category of being a sinner is also something that's always been determined by the church. Christian tradition, it's not Jewish tradition, but it's Christian tradition, and that's the reason that we're hung up on this. Now, if we want to change our terminology and say, let's talk about a non-religious term which is equivalent to sainthood, then perhaps we can get away from this problem with the Bible and trying to impose religious values on people who never even thought in religious terms.
Well,
Yeah, that would
we're
be
thinking
more
of
relevant.
heroes too, aren't we? I mean, it isn't just
Except
saints,
one
it's,
thing.
you know.
I would not, and I wouldn't want to press it as an argument, but I would maintain the thesis very much so that if you actually entered into a discussion of the things that you talked about just then, that what you would end up doing, what you would end up seeing, would be the very types of things that we have presupposed in the religious background, so that it wouldn't be an imposition of religious concepts upon a so-called secular situation, because that's a division of which you've made and which does not really exist within authentic religious life.
You know,
Doesn't it just
and
remind
there's
the people?
another point to be thought of here is that if you're going to reject the concept, or why do we have to talk in this way, then the implication is that this really has no validity for mankind, and what we are at least implying is that we should forget a religious concept. But yet, if we are going to be a total human being, we have to also relate beyond ourselves, beyond our relationships with people. And I think that it's a safe presumption the majority of people do have some slight awareness of a God figure. And I think they do try to relate to him.
Dennis, I think I heard Jack say something different than that. No, let me check it.
Right.
I didn't hear him saying reject a religious base, but more,
No,
no matter where you start. He says with his kids or maybe with himself.
No, but
and-
Jane brought
Yes,
up, why
I'm
do we have
rejecting
to
a
talk
religious
this way?
tradition as church or biblically oriented. That's what I'm saying. Everybody's religious. They're all of us. They're mysteries of existence that none of us understand and comprehend. So that whether we accept it or reject it, there is this element in our being. And I'm rejecting that we have to limit the discussion to those people who accept the church and the Bible as a means
Right.
of.
No.
Right, and I see it. So that's what I think Jack is saying too. You know, start with me, my life, where I am right now,
Right.
and then I'll respond. Then I can talk. Then I can speak out of my own experience. But if you come at me with a concept like saint, and I think that like saint, and I say, what's that? That's not me. Let's go someplace else. But if you
Yeah,
want to
but you
involve
have to
me,
have some
I'll get
kind
around
of-
to saint.
Right.
Which I think,
You have
but
to have some
just a
kind
method, I guess.
of an ideal to reach for.
Maybe
If-
not to start with. I guess that's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
I don't think that you can be a human being if you don't have some kind of an ideal.
Well, then make it a contemporary ideal.
All right,
And then if you want to see, I think that
How about
Well, what we're
Peace is
talking
an
about, how about
ideal, there's an
leadership?
ideal.
That's what we're
leadership.
talking
Now, I think like
leadership.
Archibald McLeish in the article on the paper the other day, he said the one big thing that he feels is really lacking is spiritual moral leadership. He said if you scan the country right now, you can find academic leaders, political leaders, but can you find a real spiritual leader? I mean, somebody that's really transcending, normal materialistic values. Like, just I have to. In other words,
Somebody
a man
with
who,
charisma,
yeah, charisma.
religious charisma.
Well, that
I think
road
we're
leads to
really
the cross.
talking
Not
about
too
what
many
is it.
people are looking for that one.
What does it take to make a leader? And in past years, whenever we talked about leadership, we talked about it in religious terms. A person got to be a leader because of the fact that he had certain religious credentials, which we may have imposed upon them. You take some of the worst French rulers of all time, the Louis in the 14th, 15th centuries. Men who were called Louis the Pious, Saint Louis. They weren't saints, but they had to have a certain kind of religious connotation in order to assume political leadership. And nowadays, what does it take to make leadership? Do we need this kind of religious
I think
background? Do we have to call a person a saint
But you're
in
saying
order
that
to be a
he didn't
leader?
have the religious background. He was the leader and the saint. That was just kind of
Doesn't
tagged in.
matter. When we look back at him, we said, oh, he was a saint.
But now this is the beautiful thing when these things are opening up and we discover, they weren't all saints. They're just ordinary human beings, and why they got
Not
this
only
role and
ordinary
what we
human
have
beings,
to do
but
because of it.
despicable human beings.
Well, I mean,
Despicable.
Now, I
hope
think
not.
you've arrived now at where I was about to go, that I don't think that we today draw as much on that experience, as we do our own so-called American experience. And let's look at the kinds of leaders that we've made. The leaders in our society were the same kinds of people, but they didn't have to have religious credentials to become the leaders. They later became the great builders of fine churches and so forth and so on. Then they made the switch. But the thing that's interesting to me is that how we had deified these people in the first place when all they had was money. Really, that's what they did. They went out and robbed other people.
They also had family background, which was important.
No, before they got the family background, the Vanderbilts and those people.
We're talking about
the moguls. I'm talking about our leaders.
Well,
And
even
that's
our
where they're
leaders
coming from.
in the beginning, the first generation had the money, but when you go into the third and
Martin
fourth
Luther
generation,
King didn't have any money, did he?
Well, he was certainly from a middle-class background. I mean,
Well,
this is,
Well, I mean, yeah, but he wasn't a Vanderbilt or anybody like that.
Yeah, but come
And
on
you-
now, let's
wasn't
be
he a leader?
he
realistic
wasn't a
now.
national leader.
He
He was a leader. Now, are we?
Well, that's what we're talking about.
I'd like to know who
Yes,
the leaders
but
are.
my God.
Myself, get to them.
Are we equating sainthood with leadership now?
think
Since
we
we're
have
making our
to.
transition,
Yeah,
now,
we're
is this
kind
what
of-
I
we're
think
doing?
that's definitely what we're doing.
Yeah, but I think maybe there's
And-
a dimension missing there too. Leadership, I think, is an important thing right now. Evidently, we need leadership, okay?
Yeah.
But what kind of leadership? I think there's all different kinds of leadership. There's, the general in the army, he's a leader, right? There's a professor in college, sometimes he's an academic leader. I think there is leadership, all kinds of leadership. Jory Rubin in his own right is a leader. Angela Davis in her own right is a leader. She's also a hero, so is Jory Rubin a hero. The problem comes down to is what kind of leader do we need, And then there's another problem. What norms do you need? See, and it gets all the way down to, what is human nature, It's really like so complex. I don't think we really understand. I think we understand people. First of all, that's what I meant originally. Before you can talk theologically, I think you have to, not that they're contrary either. I'm not Manichaean. That's a wipeout too. The body's over here, the soul's over here, religion's over here, and the world's over here. Although that's the way I think it's been communicated a lot.
Quite true.
But I think today we have to start out and say, all right, let's find out what we're dealing with here. These people have problems. I bumped into a lot of people that I might call, if I had to use the term, saints, because they're tremendous love. A woman with 8 kids and a broken down project, a ton of strength. She's just got so much love, And you could sit there and you say, you don't know any theology, you don't know any history, you're really an ignorant person, but you're fantastic, You've just got so much love and there's no end to your giving. And these are the unsung heroes. I think people today have to see saints in the terms of feasibility, possibility. We're all, they're part of you. You're on a road to some kind of sainthood, There's a sharing there. But I think the remoteness, today is one thing that's hurting a lot of people. Everybody's bumping into everybody, Theologically, there's a lot of disagreement, right? Although humanism is a big step. But still, churches are, my chunk, your chunk, my following, your following. Here's my message, where's your message? And I think people want somebody to just draw them together. And I think they don't want to be intellectualized. Now, I'm not anti-intellectual. I guess in a way I am, though, because I think that what we need is humanity. We just need people that are happy. A man that says, I'm really concerned about humanity. I'm happy I'm alive, and I'm really concerned about you. Now, that's not very sophisticated, but I think that we've really gotten away from that. I think
Well, we
we've
can't
I think
all be like that.
unfortunately we have to
Strive for it.
intellectualize because we've got to talk about this for an hour. So we've got to intellectualize.
Yeah.
And we've got to try and define where we stand about these things. And I think that really what you're talking about in terms of that attitude about sainthood, the woman in the ghetto who acts in a certain way to her surroundings, is, again, a Christian conception of what the old saint was like, a person filled with love and devotion and everything else. And that's how we define sainthood. And then we see a woman today who is filled with love and devotion. We say she's a saint. It's a different kind of thing. Those saints in the past became saints primarily because of their leadership potential. A guy as simple as Francis of Assisi, who withdrew from the community, became a saint primarily because of the fact that he had a following.
But he also started out with what Jack was talking about, with this tremendous sense of his humanity and his reaching out to people. And it was because he was willing to leave himself stark naked, as he did in front of his father, that people reacted to him. And a leader or a saint is somebody that we react to.
Do you
You
think
don't have to be dead and canonized to be a saint.
Do you think he would have become a saint in the eyes of the church had he not developed a real following, or
Oh,
if he had
sure.
just disappeared into the woods somewhere?
Well, it was
Oh,
his followers that made
yeah.
him a saint. He was a revolutionary, for heaven's sakes. You know, as soon as the Franciscans became enmeshed with the system, though, we don't have any more Franciscan
Right.
revolutionaries. He was a beautiful man, and yes, he was acknowledged, but by not very many people.
Let's put anybody who really gets, I think today, I guess is, you know, I guess comes down to whether or not we think a saint going to be a singular person, or is it going to be a massive ideal? Can everybody be a saint, or does it have to be an exceptional person? Must he be a revolutionary? Like for instance, that woman. I think today, if you there's a lot of talk about human values and being concerned, but very abstract. You know, a lot of people aren't doing it. They're just talking about it because they sense that there's something wrong. They sense this, you know, words like polarization, alienation. I'm lost. The world's small now. Now it's not just what happens to my neighbor could affect me. It's what happens over in California, what happens in Vietnam, what happens in the Middle East. My heavens, I feel so helpless. I mean, really lost. So people now, if they talk about this concern for humanity because they feel that's a good thing, and yet they still have to survive. They still have to function. You know, it's go, go, go. So I think that anybody who really, in fact, is sensitive to the point where they actually place other people above themselves is a revolutionary in reality. Because I think a lot of people, like for instance in our society, you know, right now, I don't use the word capitalistic in a derisive sense, but there are bad features about it. And I think that it has forced us to become impersonal. And a man who tries to be very, very personal is sort of a revolutionary. You know?
Well, what's
I
the
think
difference?
It's a shame, again, that we live in the kind of a society, first of all, that we have to pin labels on things and people and so forth. And of course, I know that's been said hundreds of times before. But it's interesting to me that in order to be a today, 1970 saint to some of the members here, you've got to be a revolutionary. And I think it's kind of interesting that, you know, that we apply that, some of us are applying that label to a saint of today. But I think also that, you know, if what some of the things you're saying, and if I'm really hearing you, then my God, Bill, we must have a lot of saints in our community, because
we do.
We have a lot of people who just sort of exude that love and that sense of humanness that, you know, like, for instance, you know, many of us who went through the selective patronage program in Philadelphia and in Jersey, and the demonstrations and all of those things, you know, that in spite of all that we had to go through, we came out of it not hating white people. Now, some of us, unfortunately, ended up hating, you know. But I really think that it's a significant thing that we lived through that, and we've lived through all of our past experiences. And despite the mass media and all of the, I know the word I want to use there, but I can't use it, all of the jive that they have put on us, you know, down through the years, that still somehow we have been able to survive in our community. And what sainthood is to us, I think, it's survival, really, you know.
I would think, I would wish to reject, not completely, but reject in part the concept of sainthood as being that of a leadership role, or even necessarily a revolutionary, except in the way that you gave a definition of it. To me, when I think in terms of sainthood, I think in terms of an individual with integrity, real inner integrity. I think in terms of an individual who has a sense of humanity and a concern with people, and a concern which motivates him to a certain kind of commitment. Now, how that commitment is going to be spelled out is going to be determined by the situation in which he finds himself.
Would you say that this would also mean an affecting of the community in which he lives, that he doesn't isolate himself, but that he becomes totally dedicated to helping the community?
Yes, I don't view it as a matter of withdrawal. No, when I said integrity and concern, my next statement is that a concern which is going to relate itself, you know, not an abstract
So in other words, you would
concern.
also include in that a certain sense of reality.
Right, it's got to be real, because
Could we tell you some of our saints? Let's see what happens, who we have for saints. Why don't you start, Denis, and let us know your present-day saints.
My present day
Yeah, people that
saints?
are living now that you consider saints, whether they consider themselves so or not.
The
Say three
Berrigans,
each, yeah.
Martin Luther King. They're John Kennedy.
Okay.
Because I think that they had a real spiritual. I think their spirituality. We tend to make this an esoteric thing, that you have to be kind of odd. But there's a real. Their total humanity came out, and the more we try to become human, the more godlike we become. And I think that even though they had feet of clay and they made many mistakes, still they had these things, this self-awareness, a self-acceptance, and they reached out in a wide, vulnerable way to people, and they suffered because of this, and they, like Reverend King said over there, they didn't get bitter, but they kept reaching out to people. And they did change in maybe a small way, but they did change the community in which they find themselves, or they are changing the community. And whether they end up getting canonized in St. Peter's or not is perfectly immaterial.
To me, some of the present-day saints I feel are people like Bill Shaw and Reverend King, and the lady who has the 8 children, because these are real leaders. These are real saints. These are human beings. They are really concerned. It's not a superficial thing as far as they're concerned. They're getting out there and they're doing their thing, whatever it might be. And the lady with the 8 children, I feel that she's like the greatest saint there is, because she's leading 8 people to a new life, so they in return can touch other people. In my opinion, these are what I call saints, really.
The idea, I guess I'm really leaning that way, obviously. Like during the summer we had a camp over in Chestnut Hill, and it was over Norwood Academy, and there was an awful lot of people that got involved in it. And this drew kids from all over the city. And some of the people that would come in, like the mothers of the children, and then people like in the Chestnut Hill community would come in and get involved, and people that you didn't even know or had didn't have any notoriety, but they just came, and it was just the idea of availability. I'm available, no matter what I know. To me, I guess if somebody asked me, I guess I'm really hung up about the idea of saint. I can't shake it loose. If we use another term.
Cultural background.
I'm interested in something. Jane asked the question. She must have had somebody in mind. She
No,
must have
I
been
wanted
thinking,
to
I'd
know.
like to know
I
what
wanted
you
to know
think.
because I don't know you people.
Well-
And this is one way I've found of asking, well, who are your heroes? Who are your saints?
Well, who are yours?
Well, Dorothy Day and Cesar Chavez and Norman Mailer.
Why?
Oh, lots of reasons, but I'd like to hear from everybody else,
Well,
I'd
we'd like to hear
Reverend
from
King's-
you. Come on, tell us.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now, certainly Dorothy Day, anyone who knows anything about people working, giving their lives, for others, Dorothy Day's in the forefront, both in her writings and her care for the poor. Some people might say this is a Band-Aid approach. Perhaps it is. Maybe Francis de Sales in taking care of the prisoners on those ships, he should have been up there knocking on the doors of the powers and saying, you shouldn't have ships like this. It's confusing, but still no one can deny that, that they are living a difficult community life, an absolute sharing, living, say, in a room with someone who piles newspapers up to the ceiling and so on, and the rats, of course, are attracted, and, putting up with these things, eating some of the food that the Catholic worker serves, which can be good and can be bad, this detachment of taking what comes and taking people as they are. I think this is wonderful. Then there's Cesar Chavez. Where does a leader come from? And again, what makes a leader different from a leader like Wallace or something? I think it's in terms of somebody who thinks of themselves in reorganizing their own being, so that, they aren't saying, well, go out and you have to do these things. They're saying, this is the way what I am doing, this is what I believe in, this is the way I'm living, and they inspire people. They're not ordering people to do this. So Cesar Chavez the same. He grew up in the fields, he knew the problems, he was able to speak to his brothers. He is a leader. Now, I can't imagine Cesar Chavez, ordering people to do something violent to get their rights. It's certainly in many unions, the goon squads and so on, And then who was my third one? Norman Mailer, because he writes so beautifully, and he expresses what lots of us have felt at some of these various things like the Pentagon raising and so on. And it gives me hope to, that there's still humor and love and insight and so on. So that's what I like.
I wouldn't equate, I would hope that Cesar Chavez's sainthood wouldn't rest upon what type of order he might have to give or directions he might have to give to some of his followers in the future, because you don't know what his situation is going to be.
Well, I know, but I don't think, I think Cesar Chavez, just as Martin Luther King, is devoted to nonviolence, and I think this is,
Do you think that's an aspect of sainthood?
Parent.
well, this is what I say. Jesus said, yes, I'm bringing a sword, not peace, I'm bringing a sword. He meant that sword is going to attack us. We're going to be torn apart in order to become, beautiful, thinking, unselfish people. But, we're not going to take the sword and, like they did in the Crusades and say, you got to be a Christian, baby, So that's what I'm saying.
Does it have to be rags? I was like, how about somebody like a lot of people that, like aren't in the news? Is it like, for instance, do you have to be in rags? Or how about somebody like Ralph Nader?
Of course not. Of course, no, Ralph, terrific. Well, I mean, can I have an hour? You could have an hour, couldn't you, with all your saints, as Bernie said? I mean, I think there are lots and lots of people that inspire us. And Reverend King, any one of us that have worked in groups know that, this is what keeps us going. There are so many.
I think, though, what I don't want to lose sight of personally, though, is this business of moving away from equating sainthood with leadership, because this is going to cross out too many people. It's going to remove them from any aspirations, and I don't want to lump them in the category of being sinners because they happen not to be leaders. I think that an individual who maintains a sense of integrity, who has a concern for people and for humankind, and for me, an individual who relates that personhood with something that's more than the immediate moment, because who sees some ultimate values, now whether you want to call it religious or anything else, who sees some ultimate value in personhood. This individual.
I think that all of these people we've talked about are that way.
I know, but and I don't deny them their role. But what I don't want to do is to exclude, to give them exclusive claim, because that's going to leave too many people down who say, well, this isn't me, because first of all, the newspaper isn't going to come where I am.
Right.
Yeah, but there's I think another way to look at it, and that is we're undergoing a change in the concept of leadership itself.
Yeah.
Before we equated it with leadership position, and look at the examples you're giving. It's become more of a functional thing. No, this group, we were told this program used to have a moderator, an official head. That's kind of the old style of leadership. You had to have a leader or the group would fall apart. But we're here talking to each other. That's a new concept of leadership. They trust us to sit here and talk to each other.
And I think
we
so.
have to have a
very-
head to keep us on,
A very interesting implication in what you say. I think at one point you said you don't want to say that only leaders can be saints, because then you relegate everyone else to being a sinner. The idea being that you've got to be either a saint or a sinner.
Yeah.
You don't have to be either one or the other. I think that's the first point. The second point is, at least in my mind, that in fact one of the great dangers that I see in our society is this movement toward egalitarianism. Everybody's exactly the same and got exactly the same rights, and therefore we've got to open up the possibility of such a hallowed word as sainthood, which we've used in a very special way for so many years, to everybody. Everybody's entitled to be a saint. I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I'm not sure that all people are entitled to call themselves saints, or to say, gee, I'm a saint because I did this, or to think in terms of the fact that they are not sinning. Again, I'm using terms that I'm not comfortable with because it's not part of my tradition, but I'm kind of bound in here.
I think we turned another corner, though, and that turning, that we went back where we were downstairs, when we talked about the problem with using these two particular terms. What I saw when the people started to name their saints, I saw really heroes, and I think that that's where we went. I really do think that was where we went. And focusing on that, and I thought, well, we were going to go around the room and everybody's going to name their heroes. And I started trying to figure out, now how am I going to deal with this? Because if I talk about saint, then in the context and from where I'm coming, then I must talk about what I say Sunday morning to my congregation. And I can't remove myself from that.
Well, are
which
you
means
removed from that?
Beg your pardon?
Are you removed from what you say? Aren't you what you say? Well, then why can't you say anything here?
Oh, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. But what I was trying to set up is that I wanted to talk about two things as I saw it. I saw us on the one hand talking about saints and on the other hand talking about sinners. And the context and where I'm coming from and what I preach Sunday morning in terms of saints, then, you know, every member of my congregation can be a saint.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, the closer you live to the Lord Jesus Christ, then you're a saint. In my congregation,
I'll buy
you know,
that.
okay. Now, but if we're going to talk about heroes,
Yeah.
then that's another thing. And then I've got to really go back, and I really got to, you know, think in terms of when schools in our communities were completely and totally segregated. My first ideas of heroes, and thank God for it, was what that black teacher started to teach me then about black heroes. You know, and as I went through that elementary school, and, you know, and that was the only time I learned about my heroes, you know. And once I got to the junior high school, I didn't hear any more about it unless I went out and read something on my
So in
own.
other words, you're acquainting sainthood with ultimate goodness.
Yes.
No, you.
In a sense.
I think you're being specific. I think like that ultimate goodness was in your case, you know, Jesus Christ. Right?
Yeah,
You had
yes,
a definite,
yes,
a very specific
yes.
thing.
Oh, yes.
All right, you know, I think like listening to Jane, I think it comes down to what is our norm for a saint? You know, which is it Jesus Christ approximating, you know, Christ? Is it approximating social benefit, what they do for society? Is it inner disposition? In other words, I think you'd have to, and can you come up with a norm? Or is it just something that is so relative? Is it like that old saying that there are many roads to travel? You know, there are many different ways depending on where you're sitting and what your personality is and what your opportunities are. You know, because I think if I was trying to sift everything out, I think it would be, for me, availability, you know, would be one thing. But the person would just have to be available. You might not change the world. There are people right now, I think, that are working, laboring, really, you know, giving everything they have, but nobody knows, sees, hears, but they're
Well, their
giving.
brothers do. Their mothers and fathers and sisters and so on. Yes, they.
Well, but I mean, it's very limited. They wouldn't be a kind of like when we say Ralph Nader or somebody like that. They wouldn't have that universe. See, I even wonder about these people. I said Ralph Nader because I think he's doing a job, but I don't know about his inner disposition. I don't even know.
Well, does it matter? This is the beautiful. I mean, who cares? You know what one's personal life is or what you do. It's how, you know.
Well, I think
No, I
that's
think it's
important.
important.
I think it does.
Well, no, I mean in the sense of the old traditions, like, so why do I include Norman Mailer? I don't know what his sex life is like or something. Apparently it's very varied or something. But, I mean, and I don't accept that or live by it, but, I mean, that's what I mean, that, so that to think that they have to reveal a beautiful person, this is our old notion of sanctity, that the person was so beautiful, you know, and that's why we could never attain it, because, my heavens, who could be perfectly patient, perfectly just, and this is
You know,
it.
that
But
we ran
if
into
he's
that
not
problem
real
with
himself, he's not going to be real in his
Well,
relationships
then this is
with you.
your basis, certainly having integrity. Well, then I would accept this, but having, you know, even
can't
this
measure his
total.
integrity,
I mean,
you
lots
know?
of neurotic people are very fine people, but they really don't have a, you know, maybe their personality isn't, you know, absolutely beautifully. Are any of us until we die, and are we then? You
Well, we
know?
ran into this problem this year when we were talking about probably one person whom we might all categorize as being at the top of the ladder in the
Who?
20th century, Martin Luther King.
Well, you would find some people not putting him up on the.
Well,
That's what
we,
he means, the book, you know.
we
Oh,
all generally feel, I would guess that the 8 people here would say that Martin Luther King was at the high end of being a good person.
yes.
However, J. Edgar Hoover tried to pull this thing with him regarding his sexual activities, and everyone became very upset about the fact that this was even a possibility. And I suspect it's because many people looked at Martin Luther King as being a person that could never ever react this way to a fellow human being. He was so good and so perfect that there could never be any possibility that he would do something wrong sexually, which of course had nothing to do with the way he reacted regarding the civil rights issues that
But
he was
why
concerned
is it always
with.
sexual? You do something wrong. You know, you can be a
Well, we've got real
a
hang-ups about
banker,
sex.
you know,
That's
and
the
you know,
reason.
right?
You know,
Yeah,
I
well,
think
we
one
all
of
get back to
the
sex.
really beautiful things that happened to me was one of the young intellectuals that I work with, young black intellectual, said to me that you know, he's not really dug into religion and everything, but he said this to me one day, and I thought it was really groovy. He said that he felt that the black preacher, you know, live so close to the human side of life and face the fact that, preachers have human frailty. And for him, this is what made the black religious experience unique and wonderful, and really made it meaningful in his life. And whereas, he's not a churchgoer and everything, but still, he hasn't dropped out like a lot of the young intellectuals, both black and white, have done. And that really struck me because, I had never really thought about it in terms of that. But as you look at our community and, Ellison and his Invisible Man, I think the guy's name was Youngblood or something, he's a preacher, he's a pimp, and he's a whole lot of things, Now I'm not saying that
He has a storefront church too. What about building up a big church when one's burned down? What do you think about that? How would people respond to this as the needs of our present time?
What how about the trend today? Like, let's say the anti-heroes. Because maybe another dimension is the idea that the saint has to be real. Like, I guess I constantly come back to Younger because that's like my own immediate experience. Okay, let's take Easy Rider, Joe. A million different kinds
Is Joe
of people.
a hero?
Or an anti-hero in a way.
Is it?
It's what I think to a lot of people. Yeah, I think a lot of people just the fact that. No, I mean in this way, Joe he's Joe. I mean, Joe says, here I am, I don't care what you think, wham, and that's it. And the same so does Fonda. Fonda says, I don't play your silly games. I'm going to go to my motorcycle, I'm going to ride. And talking to the kids, they say, boy, at least they're real, Joe's great. The 5-minute dialogue in the bar when Joe just explodes and says, boy, this is the way I feel, and everybody's sitting there, some people are very sensitive, say, oh, Joe, you can't say
And yet
things
in
like
the end,
that.
doesn't he end up pandering to somebody else's interests?
Pandering to someone else's interest.
He relates to the upper class person whom he meets and is very much concerned with becoming his friend.
But only so far as they have, but he still tries to maintain his own identity. That man comes down to Joe, too. There's something in both of them that's really part of both of them that brings them together. And I think that when you talk to the kids, the thing that they seem to be concerned with now, although what they think is real isn't always real, they just want somebody that's real, and they'll accept it in all kinds of packages. They'll accept it in Fonda. Fonda and Joe are about as far apart as you can get. And so is Steve McQueen in all his movies. He and Fonda, like Steve McQueen, is sort of the hard guy. Casual, but hard. Fonda is not exactly hard, but very casual.
Would you put MASH in this category, too?
Yeah, I would, very definitely. Very
Adolf
definitely.
Hitler was real too.
Well, yeah, but the whole,
So is Wallace. And he's
So
a
is Wallace.
saint
And for
some
many people,
I
they
just
were
can't
and
go
are
that far.
saints.
No, but see, you have to
They
see.
are revered figures.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, you have to understand their mentality. They might even if they feel like, for instance, Hitler, although we never talked about that, is really real, and Hitler's really concerned about the German people. Hey, sorry, this guy's got something to offer. I have a lot more empathy with a guy like Hitler, who really is doing his thing and being real, than somebody that's playing all kinds of games and is just trying to throw out theories. I think that the kids haven't selected what standard they want. Right now, they've only come to the point that they want air, they want to breathe, they want something fresh and something real. Don't tell me what I've got to do for the next 15 years. Don't jam a code down my throat. Don't tell me that my drugs are wrong. You've given me nothing positive. Tell me what I can be. Just let me be me. Give me a chance.
So in other words, we have no right to condemn Hitler.
We have no right to condemn him. That's really put me on the spot.
You're
'cause
darn right.
You're putting me, you're putting me on that. Let's say I disagree with him. You want me to make a moral judgment on Hitler's sincerity?
Absolutely.
Or,
No, I want to make a moral judgment on Hitler, period. Don't talk about sincerity.
I think that this is going to sound really wild, especially on that. Yeah. If Hitler was being real, and you can judge that, the guy was devastating. I think a society is based on diversity, on the idea that if every man tries to be authentic, somehow it balances out. And she comes to this idea, I guess, of some kind of divine providence. If there is a force of good, if there is, in fact, something working in man, if man really is himself, then this force eventually, the truth will set you free type thing, and in the final analysis, maybe this is all hogwash. That's what the kids want to know. We told them, even I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes said, the best test of truth is its ability to survive the competition of the marketplace. And the kids are saying, you're not even religion. You're not trying to survive the competition of the marketplace, and you're running, you're copying out. You're trying to say this is the way it is now. We're just getting away from authority, the idea of authority. A lot of times, instead of examining people and allowing them to be themselves, we said, no, you're wrong, this can't be. And we stifle a lot of creativity. Even as horrible as it sounds, as much as I disagree with them, as much as I would have tried to stop them, but I would have been me. I think Hitler was probably playing his role in developing.
Jack, in the people you've mentioned, I didn't see Easy Rider, so I can't talk on that. But you're talking about being real. All right, well, I think we can agree that Hitler was real, neurotic and crazy, and the rest of it, however you want to put it. But when you're talking about a saint, and I maybe I didn't hear you correctly. I thought you were implying this, that we could, for in his own category, Hitler could be a saint.
No, he'd be a sinner.
No, he didn't say that.
That's what we turn around,
No,
the
because-
sinner is the exact opposite.
Okay, but the other dimension is that you have to, what is the person doing, not just for himself, but for the benefit of the community, and all of the people whom we call saints, Abraham and Moses, all the way down through the history of Israel and the Christian era, are people who reached out for the benefit of the community in some way, on a spiritual, with a spiritual dimension attached to it.
Let me,
I
can
think
I
that's
just
one dimension. Sure.
throw this in too? And I think at some point I read something by Fromm, and he was saying something that I thought was rather relevant. I thought about this as I was after I got the papers. He says, "Except a man love every man as his brother." And I can't quote it verbatim. And he goes on to say, that no amount of scientific training or learning, will help us to do this. That we sort of have to do it in order. And unless we do this, and we can run around and we can talk about love of country and love of God and all of that, and go to war and kill people. And, unless we really love one another, every man is my brother, then it's really all a big
Which means,
shame.
first of all, we got to love ourselves. Which
Right.
is,
Well, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't love themselves, and that I think again that's kind of a sad thing. And I think again that we have to, lay the blame for this at the doorstep of out of the civilization from which we spring,
and
Western
I also
Christian
think,
civilization.
I also think loving, just making a blanket statement, loving every man as his brother is, although it sounds good, I think it leads to problems. I quite honestly could say without any hesitancy I would have an impossible time if I had to love Hitler. I couldn't. I just could not love that man. And there are other people I could think of whom I just could not love. I don't have it within me to love everybody. Because there are certain people who do things which are so abhorrent to my way of thinking that I just can't possibly see considering myself on an equal level that I can share everything
Well,
with.
what
Where's the
you're
hope of
saying
mankind
is
then?
that then black people in America, and because of our experience essentially, then we should hate all white people, And what I'm saying, indeed, that what one has to do is transcend the fact that there are, quote, evil men in our society who do dastardly things, but somehow or another.
So hate those men.
But,
No.
that
That's
affects
destructive.
me when I start
Right.
to hate those men. And I've got to be able to transcend.
In other words, do you think it's something that I should do to transcend this feeling that I have about Hitler? I should now love him?
Look,
At least,
I had to do it.
maybe it's not like it's the idea.
And if
you
I had to do it, why not you?
If you abhor Hitler, how about if Hitler? Let's follow that logically, okay? Now Hitler's a sensational example because it's a real hate object. Everybody gets hung up. He killed 5 million Jewish people, which was really abhorrent. That's an abhorrent act. I don't know what made that man tick. I know he had to be stopped, okay, from my viewpoint. But now, if you felt that he had a right to be destroyed because you hated him, then he might find you abhorrent. A million people in the society find a million other people abhorrent. Then where I think this idea of transcendency is really vital. There's got to be some bond. There has to be something joined us. We have to rise above that. Society's got to survive, but it doesn't have to hate necessarily. Now, maybe what we're saying, because if what you say is true, if the psychologists, the anthropologists, and the sociologists all come out and say, it's not possible, then this whole idea of love and religion and the whole Christian message and the whole religious message, the idea of which is share, love your brother, all growing, like Chardin said, toward this omega point, that eventually all men are going to express themselves and come together. Well, right away we say no, can't do it, because there are some people, you see, that I must hate. There are some people.
Well, there are some people I cannot love.
Well,
You see, you immediately assume that because I said I could not love Hitler, that I have to automatically hate him with a passion so that I want to destroy him and everything connected with him. No, I think he's got to be stopped, a man like Hitler. I don't think you destroy all of Germany because of Hitler. And I think that although there are certain white people who have done terrible things to the black community, they are people that have to be stopped and had to have been stopped in the past and perhaps weren't. But that doesn't mean that you hate the whole white community.
But you also
For
have to
that.
understand what created, like, for instance, if you want to take Hitler, then take somebody like Jerry Rubin, okay? Now, I think a lot of people find Jerry Rubin very easy to hate, you know. How many, I don't know, but Jerry Rubin right now is going through a period where he's just saying, all right, I'm going to say what a lot of people are feeling, a lot of kids are feeling, you know, do wild things, you know, his book is filled with incredible things, you know. Some of the kids I know that are straight kids really think Jerry Rubin is tremendous. They really identify with him because he's just like breaking the change, right? I don't think hating Jerry Rubin, for instance, the people that like to hate him and say he's certainly hateable, is going to solve anything. What we have to find out, I think.
I don't have to love him, though.
No, I don't know if you, but I think the word, I don't know, maybe love's too strong. Maybe eventually it'll
What do you
come,
mean
but I
by
think
love?
understand.
Yeah.
You know, what is
What do
that?
you mean
That's, I was not the one that brought it up. Other people have been banding around about how I have to love my brother. I'd like to know what that means.
Well, you know,
Larry,
Well,
Except
what did
the
they
other.
mean in Deuteronomy? Isn't it in Deuteronomy that it says that the great commandment is to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself? What does that mean? Isn't it in Deuteronomy, Leviticus? I forget.
No, it's in Deuteronomy 6.
Mm.
Deuteronomy 6. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and might. There's nothing in there that I can recall that says that you've got to love your brother.
What do you use as a measuring stick if you don't love? Oh, you were going to say something.
Larry, all I wanted to say was that I just feel that, you know, love is a very strong word to use. But if you just accept people as you find them, you know, taking the bitter with the sweet, and I would say your greatest saints are your best sinners. This is the way, this is life, you know. A model, an ideal person to me has to be an average person, an all-around person. They have to have, you know, good points as well as bad points. And, well, we agree, Hitler had a lot of bad points as well as good points.
Do I
wherever they were.
have to accept a person bent on my destruction?
I think
well, you know,
I have to-
Equated with love.
you know, that's the point. You know, that's the point, I think. And if that's where you are, and if indeed some of us, and obviously some of us are there, then, you know, like when the revolutions, the rebellions, you know, hit the inner cities, and, you know, that guy that owned the corner store, you know, was bent on black people's destruction. So they went out and did something about it. But what happened? All of the liberals and all the other self-righteous folk in the society jumped up and screamed, you know, wow. And they sent in tanks and they sent in all kinds of things to repress these people because what they're doing is wrong, you know. Yeah, and judgments were passed and are still being passed today on that kind of action. The lady over here, you know, she can't see Cesar Chavez ordering people to go out and become violent or something, you said, you know.
I think that you're right. You have to understand that violence is part of a human nature, and that people pushed far enough and given the opportunity will resort to violence. And until all of humanity changes, then if we talk about love, love, love without understanding that, then we're being totally unrealistic and irrelevant.
Larry,
Yeah,
maybe
you know,
you
When I
should
say
tell
love,
you
though,
that-
I think when I say love, I'm not particularly feeling about speaking of an emotional sentiment for the moment, because I think that an individual could very likely get as angry as all get out with you or with anybody here in this panel. But this doesn't mean that I have hate for that person or that I don't love. Howard Thurman gave a definition of love which is most meaningful to me, and he said being able to love another individual is being able to will the ultimate good of that individual, regardless of what his existential situation is. It's being able to deal with another individual as though that individual was what you would like for him to be.
I don't understand that. I really don't.
You don't.
See, if you
I don't
adopt
understand.
logically, if you adopt that mentality, I'm not saying this is easy. My God, we all know it. There are certainly people that, you know, rub us the wrong way. I'm saying this is a goal. To me, either I completely abandon religion or Christianity and say it's psychologically impossible. If I start off with the premise that some people I have to hate, then I'm automatically going to put myself in a counter-reaction situation, because they're going to do violent things and I have to counter-react to that, and I feel that sets off a chain reaction. Because to me, for instance, this idea of a saint might be a person who has some kind of sensitivity. He's a unifying force, you know. He is a person who brings people together. He's not identified with just any one group. He really is concerned with this idea of humanity. Like a person like Jerry Rubin, I want to know, he offends me, what he does. But I'd like to know why Jerry is Jerry, and also an awareness that the line between Jerry Rubin and myself may be that thin. An awareness that there are so many forces affecting the human psychology and human action that I have no right to hate. It may come, I may have this emotion, but I have an obligation to try to just, eliminate it or cope with it, or, because but for environment and about 50,000 other variables go I can't hate Jerry Rubin. I may be Jerry Rubin. Jerry Rubin didn't go through what I went through, and I didn't go through what Jerry Rubin experienced. So hate is sort of a luxury. It's not something that I'm entitled to. And if I really believe in this idea of Christ, as this supreme love, and if I agree with Chardin that this is the final goal of humanity, then I've got to accept the fact that I'm just going to have to open myself and take the risk of being rejected. Keep on trying. I can't
Maybe
afford
Larry
hate.
doesn't accept Christ. He doesn't.
Well, let's say
Maybe I don't.
let's say God.
But
I'm sorry.
that's not
Because
relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, no.
Not Christ as such. That was
No,
relevant
right.
to me.
That's fine. I
Right,
understand
yeah.
that. I understand that.
But even if you don't have Christ, there's Buddha and,
Right, that's right.
Confucius. I mean, you don't have...
I'm not sure Moses loved that. He killed people. All right.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the fact that I go under the presupposition that there are some people I must hate, no. But I have to be realistic in understanding that there are going to be situations from time to time, or there may be situations where somebody will kick me in the teeth hard enough and long enough where I will really begin to resent him and perhaps even hate him. Now, I'm not going to do that immediately. Now, Jerry Rubin hasn't really done anything to hurt me personally. And the chances are he never will. So I never will get to hate him. I don't hate Jerry Rubin. But in terms of the possibility that there are certain people who could do this to me, I have to be realistic and say yes. And I can't continually, I'm not going to turn my other cheek.
What's the goal of humanity then, Larry? What is the goal of humanity? Where are we going?
To live together in peace.
How can that happen with that kind of acceptance?
I think that it's the only way it can happen. If you're realistic in terms of accepting the idea that there are people who are going to act this way. And until you become realistic about it, then you can't deal with it. If you continually turn the other cheek, I think the great fallacy with that is if you continually turn the other cheek, other people are going to keep slapping you until you've shown them or convinced them that it doesn't pay for them to keep slapping you. And I don't think that you're going to convince them by making it worth their while by doing nothing.
So what are you going to do to them?
I'm going to fight back.
And they're going to fight back, and you're going to eliminate. They're going to eliminate. Then what's the final conclusion? I'm not saying like this is it's really, no, I agree with it. Certainly, in many situations where, I'm saying this has got to be logical to me, to be logical with this concept of religion and God and love, okay? To be really consistent there, I can't accept that because...
Well, supposing every day that I see you every day, and every day I walk up to you and punch you in the mouth.
Well, he's stupid for standing there. He should duck.
All right. And then
that's a reaction.
So I'm going to go after him. I'm going to keep trying to get him and punch him in the mouth every day. Get rid of my aggressions that way.
I think what Larry's saying is very real, though, in the sense. But, my problem with the whole thing is that, we can't achieve these ultimate goals. We got to face the reality of what Larry's saying. And I sense that Jack's saying that, young people are trying to reach, perhaps for lack of a better word, some kind of a utopia in today's society. And, frankly, I don't think that that's possible today. I think that we've got to start at some point in working towards that ultimate goal. And perhaps young people have done that. And if they have indeed done it, I think that's great. But, the real world of today and all of our experiences included, your experience and where you're coming from is what the young people are experiencing. In terms of where I am, I've got to be able to relate not only to some of those young people that you're talking about, but I've got to relate to people who are in my own age group and who are older than me, And I can only do that in terms of my own experiences. And part of that experience does indeed say, I think, what Larry is saying. For instance, when I was in the service and serving in Georgia, and was walking down the street one day, and all of a sudden, I was out in the middle of the road, and I didn't, really know what was going on until I realized that some whites coming by had knocked me out in the road, But I submit today, if I went back to that same town and walked down the street, they would move over and give me some room.
Why?
because of what Bobby Seale and people like Bobby Seale
Exactly.
have done. Which means, again, that you've got to have people who are going to pay dues.
Right?
Yeah,
Where
that's,
does
that's
that-
the old
where does
rule
that
of
word-
fear. That's the old rule of fear. We're doing things. That's why we've had wars. You know, and
know,
we always have wars. The Bible
I
says we're
wanna-
always going to have them. So we're
Yeah,
always
but
going to
you
have
can't
them.
deny that
Isn't
a
there a
lot of-
possibility of new people? You know, new. We're emerging into.
Reverend King saying, yeah, but look, some social change happened not because of love, maybe in the minds of the individuals
That
involved.
permits me to love.
But it happened
You know.
through
But he
laws
paid the
and
dues.
violence and riots.
So who's
and
right in the
what.
end?
Well,
But
I
we're
don't
saying
know
The
who's
guy
right
who
in
wins?
the end.
No.
The guy gets the. I mean, this
But
is
he
the,
feels better right now because he could walk down that street and it didn't happen because of love.
Oh no, no!
Well,
come on.
again, and that would be a whole new discussion. I
Yeah.
think you'd have to go into a definition of what you were talking about love, because
Well,
I
I
think
don't
we're
get
equating
lost in the
it with
definition.
And the
I
difference
think-
of love and
like
some
and
of
to
the violence and
embrace
this kind of
somebody,
thing.
Right.
and that's
People
not
towards the
necessarily
bottom, you know.
so.
Can
Right,
I
that's
ask a
true.
question? Would a person feel himself to be a better human being if, in this case that Larry presented, granted he ducked, but at the same time he sat down and tried to figure out what was wrong with that person, and then tried to discover ways of relating to that person so that he could help that person relieve himself.
Sometimes your choices. We talk about making choices. You can't choose except from the alternatives that are presented to you.
Right.
And there's no absolute ideal which says this is the way you ought to act in a given moment. I'm not going to say that the best choice in a given situation, if you keep hitting me, is to knock you back. I'm not going to say.
Yeah, but
and
what
I'm not
I-
going to say that that's
It may be,
non-Christian.
though. It may
But-
be that if you find
That
if you-
might be the
you
best
slug me
choice. That
back,
might be the most
nothing's gonna
Christian
happen.
choice that I could have
Yeah.
to bring out
Right.
the best good out of that given situation.
So sometimes
Yeah,
the most
but if
realistic
it's-
thing sometimes is not the most loving in the beginning.
Right.
I think that
well,
resolves like on some kind of a super ego.
I don't
review.
have to hate you when I hit you back.
That's right.
Right.
That's
true
the
too.
point.
That's what I meant by
That's
love in
the
the
point.
middle of it. See?
But deal
No
with the
matter how you
situation.
do it, when you do it out of love, don't you feel like you have grown a little as a human
Man, I'm
being?
going to slug you out of love.
You know, I think I think the whole
What an
thing.
idea.
Well, you know, when we
be a lot of
reprimand our children, isn't that in essence what we're doing?
One of the great hypocrisies of our modern tradition is that we can do something like that. We can punch somebody and say, I'm doing it out of love.
Doesn't a mother spank her
Well, that's
kid
right.
out
And
of
yet
love?
you're saying you're
That's a
trying to
different
give us the
situation.
Oh,
case
it
for
is.
punishing.
Sure.
them.
What is it?
It's
If you're
exactly
thinking in
the
terms
same
of value
situation.
judgments and the type of good
I'm
that-
not your mother. There's a different. I don't have responsibility for you the way a
In
mother does
reality,
for a
I
child.
think
Oh,
very
yeah,
On the
you have
contrary,
responsibility
you
for
do.
me.
You
You
do.
do have responsibility
This
for
is-
me, and I for
Then
you.
you're deprecating the family relationship. There's something special about the family relationship that transcends personal relationships between other people.
Hey, look,
But I'm
if
saying
you
that
want to
you're
look
a part
back,
of a human family. You're part of a
Yeah,
larger
right,
family.
that's right.
Oh yeah, I'm part of a human family.
And in that sense, you
but
have
my
responsibility
relationship,
for me, and I have responsibility for you.
but it's a different kind of responsibility than my responsibility for my children. That's a different.
that's
I
the
think-
good
I
thing
think the
about
whole
all
thing
of
here
this
is if
woman
you-
is
Responsibility
ours.
is to help the people with whom you come in contact to grow as human beings, and you use you first of all become sensitive to them, try to find out how they tick, and then find out the ways of helping them to change. Sometimes it is a nice loving slug in the jaw.
I'm not really sure what